Hi, and welcome to another ISOOSI chat, our regular Tuesday roundtable discussion about search, social, and all things marketing. I'm Carlos Fernandez, president of ISOOSI, and today we're going to be talking about graphs, vaults, knowledge bases, semantic search, entities, and all kinds of wonderful things, or should that be wonderful strings. And joining us today, we have an expert on this subject. We have Barbara Starr, and she is a semantic strategist and software engineer and founder of Semantic Fuse. And we also have our regulars, Amon Johns, ISOOSI's resident search marketing consultant, and we have Bill Slawski, director of search engine marketing at Goldfish Digital. So Barbara, great to have you here. Do you want to just give us, our audience, a bit of an introduction and tell us about what you do? Background and what you do at Semantic Fuse?
Sure. So my initial background is in the area of artificial intelligence. I started my PhD there in South Africa. Never finished it. I was actually lecturing at the university, and I was offered a job to come to the United States and build intelligent trading systems on Wall Street. And I elected to come to the US. South Africa wasn't so great in those days. On the day I left, I got a nice little note hand-delivered in my mailbox, and this day one white woman will be raped and one white child will be killed. I was kind of happy to come. And I came to the US. I started building expert trading systems on Wall Street, and once I got my citizenship, I got into all kinds of government work. So I started working on a project at SAIC. I was the chief knowledge engineer. I had as many as 5 different projects at the time. High-performance knowledge bases, where I had to do both the semantic and syntactic alignment, and was lead principal investigator and systems architect for 17 different research institutions and universities, ranging from Stanford University, MIT, Northwestern, and we built question answering systems on top of high-performance knowledge bases. Then I worked on Art as a Quaint program, which I was principal investigator at the SAIC team. That ultimately ended up being the genesis for Watson. And in later stages, I worked on Siri, which was, as you guys all know, it was the DARPA Pell program. Cato was the one headed up by SRI. And then I got sick of all this government contract work and went to overstock.com and fell over backwards into the world of SEO kind of thing. From building search engines to discovering there was this thing called search departments, and they didn't build search engines. They figured out how to do it. I was shocked.
So you know, let's just go and say you know a fair thing or two about knowledge bases. Then you've got a fair good resume there. So it's great to have you on. Like I said, and you're an expert in this field. You know, our audience is a little bit different. A lot of small businesses, and you know, if there's things we'll be going over. You know, even just like what is semantic search and entities and all things like that. We might be kind of dumbing it down a little bit just for our audience, but you know, we want to make sure that everybody understands not only what this is, but how they can try and harness the changes that are coming in search engines for for their small business websites. So let's kind of go to the knowledge graph. You know, there's been the talk of the knowledge vault recently, but the knowledge graph was kind of one of the first, major steps. Knowledge bases as such have been around for, a long time, and people think that they're kind of new. But the difference between a relational database, which we'll get into after, and kind of object-oriented type of databases, they've been around a long time. But getting that onto the web and getting that into something like the knowledge graph was kind of, I think, Google was one of the big first major steps towards a semantic search, a semantic web, and their kind of goal was to improve their answering capability, if you will, and to do that, to be able to become this kind of answer engine, if you will, and be able to kind of give people information back when they want it. They had to kind of improve their ability to understand user intent, or as you said in many articles, disambiguate, what that intent was. Can we, just start off on that before we get into the knowledge bases and how they were constructed and things like that? We'll talk about the difference between kind of keywords, or the old kind of keyword mentality and what entities are, for example? Because again, a lot of our audience have heard these words being flashed around, but they don't really know what they mean.
So I think the key thing to understand the difference between keywords and entities is the fact that entities really deal more with a concept, an innate concept that it's something you're teaching the machine. You can think of it as knowledge representation. So you're a computer. Imagine you're a computer and you're like this dumb thing, but you can process information really fast. So in order to explain to the computer or create a representation internally in that computer, you have to teach it concepts. So you tell it, well, there's a thing called a table, and you put things on a table, and a table has 4 legs. So the properties of that table is that it has 4 legs. You can associate other things with it. You know, in a table's world, well, it has things put on, it gets cleaned. There's only certain things that can happen to a table. And of course, tables aren't all that interesting to search engines unless you're a furniture store and you're selling tables. So you take that exact same concept and move it to people's places and things, which I'm sure everybody keeps hearing about. So you can describe a thing, which is olden days, everything was a thing and it was tangible and intangible. And I see schema.org inherited that as well. But you have to teach the computer what each of these things. The knowledge graph's goal is, and Google's goal, to tell the knowledge graph, teach it about every little thing in the world. And not only just give it an identity, but explain to it what concepts are associated with it. So keywords use all kinds of other things, grammatical associations, words like, articles of speech, they can be ambiguous, they're not explicit enough, but everything in the world has a unique identity. So resolving a set of keywords or a phrase or a concept down to an entity is a very, very powerful thing for a computer to do, because every entity at the end of the day is unique. Each human being has a unique social security number. Product can have a product ID or a GTIN, a global trade item number. And the value of all of this is in uniquely identifying those things and what properties or attributes they have. And so you can think of the knowledge graph as a baby.
So an entity. After you, Bill.
Barbara, so one of the things that we've seen lately at Google, at Microsoft, even at Yahoo, has been this knowledge web showing up as if it's now on equal footing with the world of queries and keyword research and so on. And yesterday Google announced something they called structured snippets, where they include facts along with query results. So we get both in the same snippet. What other types of things are we seeing from the knowledge web that are showing up when we perform a search in Google?
Well, there's all kinds of things, of course. So you have the knowledge graph, and initially we just started out with concepts, schema.org. What were the search engines doing? They were effectively exploiting metadata in the web pages, semantic markup, to create enhanced displays and get higher click-through rates, better user interfaces for the users. Then we saw the knowledge graph. And if you think about it, how can you explicitly tell a search engine what's on your page? You can tell it what entities there are, like schema.org. But that's sort of slow. You have to build the whole ontology, and yes, we're doing events, and then we're doing reviews. From day one, in fact, when Google created DBpedia, which is the heart of that big linked open data cloud and very much a source of information for the knowledge graph, they were extracting and exploiting the fact that tables are actually structured information as well. And the more and more structured information in the form of tables and any form of structure, even possibly information embedded in the DOM, all kinds of HTML elements as they get more sophisticated, can give you more and more sources of information to tell Google what is structured information, what is not. So if you find a means of structuring your information on a web page, from tables to schema.org, in a way you're actually explicitly providing those search engines the capability to extract that information directly and not have to deal with ambiguities typically involved in natural language processing, which is what I always call things like natural language processing or something like PageRank very much stochastic algorithms. They're not symbolic. So symbolic algorithms are very much what philosophers learned about. In the olden days, you have things called modus predicate calculus and propositional calculus, but you can know something for 100% sure. So we know for 100% sure at this point in time that the Earth is not flat. That we know it's round. But there's certain things you want to know with almost 100% certainty. And I think in general, from what I've gathered, Google's knowledge graph is a huge fact repository of linked data, not linked pages. We've transitioned from a web of links, hyperlinks, linked documents to linked data.
Mm-hmm. So if we kind of, for those of us who were working with databases, 20 odd years ago, and just for those people who are used to seeing spreadsheets and tables and rows, can we think of this type of database, if you will, as almost like a instead of being, again, structured data in tables and rows, but being kind of 3D lumps of data that are all kind of referring to one another, is that kind of how you could imagine the structure of it?
Yes, you can imagine the structure. So you've heard the word triples.
Yeah.
Subject, predicate, object.
Object, yeah.
Peter is a person. So Isa would be the predicate, Peter would be the name, and person would be the schema.org object or whatever it is. So the beauty of these terms as well is that you don't have to predefine everything like in a relational database. They're more interactive and iterative. So you can just add a new schema on the fly in many of these quote-unquote triple stores. And you can link to it. Once you say someone is a person, then you say this person has a son, and that son has a dog, and so on and so on. And you can see all the connections between the data. And Google now infers those connections from what's on the web page.
Mm-hmm. And Google's come out with a number of ways where they talk about how they might extract this type of information. One of the benefits that we see as website owners are special displays in search results or rich snippets, which is a carrot that gets a lot of people to adopt this type of stuff. But there are things like the carousel results of images that sometimes show up when Google sees you have a list of something. And there are others, and there probably will be more. So a lot of people in SEO and marketing are probably asking themselves, how do I take advantage of this stuff? How do I set it up? And there's some tools to do that, and sometimes it's ideal to do it when you're starting a website. But how much work is it to transition a website that's been around in one form or another to use this type of semantic markup?
I think, unfortunately, there aren't enough great tools out there that do a fantastic job of adding markup to the page. But in general, the way schema.org is structured, it's built around, quote unquote, things that search engines are interested in. So a very good idea is to look at schema.org, figure out what of your content looks like what's in schema.org. And if you don't have the wherewithal to completely revamp your website and structure it around schema.org, which I've heard people have success to do, try and see what's on each of your pages in terms of what is defined in schema.org, what's important to your business, and look at schema.org, they're telling you there this is important to search engines, and add that specific markup. There's plugins available. You might just have to do it with HTML snippets, or call in an expert, and then just think in general what search engines want to see. So they want to see what they can read, what's machine readable. And at this point, this is now schema.org, it's structured information. Probably if you found a way of putting a piece of a spreadsheet on a web page and that's valuable information, they'll probably gobble it up. And the more structured data you give them, the more you could be pre-positioned to take advantage of all these enhanced displays Google keeps coming up with. Or your data could be pre-positioned.
So it seems like, obviously, if you're running an e-commerce website or I don't know, even a chamber of commerce, you've got events, there's definitely more of a more of an impact that markup could do for your website and your business right now on the web. For example, I mean, if you're just a a contractor and you're doing, like, for example, swimming pool contractor in a local vicinity, you're going to have some service pages that are not going to be able to be marked up to the same extent as an e-commerce website, where you could mark up things like prices and property names and things like that. Is it still as important? Is there still some aspects of schema that just service-related kind of businesses can still kind of leverage?
I mean, if you look at the definition in schema.org of product, it's product or service. So you can mark up a service very much like you can mark up a product. So I would absolutely recommend anybody who has a services-oriented business mark up their offerings, because services are offerings. And you can use schema.org markup, and it's called product or service. And there's several examples I could think of or send out there. Martin Hebb has some interesting ones. I've actually marked up services in the past for clients on a page, and I think it has a huge advantage.
I think you could point to Google Maps or Google Local as an example of knowledge base that's being displayed on the web. So there's schema specifically for local businesses, and just by making sure you've got your name, your address, your hours of operation, things like that marked up, you've got a better chance of Google getting that information in there and getting it right. And if you're the website which tends to have the most authoritative or the best information of any websites that might include information about your website, you may be seen as the authoritative website for that business by Google.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing that's actually probably fairly handy and interesting to put on is think about putting geo-coordinates on as well.
One of the things I have a problem with about schema is that for years and years, the search engines have told us, don't do anything just for search engines.
Sorry,
and yet,
don't do anything.
Now suddenly they do want us to do stuff just for search engines and put in a load of code that doesn't help the user in any way, that adds to the overhead of our site, on the chance that maybe they'll put it into some algorithm somewhere that will give it a bit of enhanced prominence. How do you balance the potential chance that maybe there'll be a benefit against the known disbenefit of adding code to the page, making the page load slower for everybody?
I don't think the page loads that much slower. I
didn't say much, I just said slower.
Yeah, I think the benefits are enormous because computers are machine readable, and in real time and super fast they can only process so much information. So if I was going to run a crawler over a website, I can extract the schema.org information far quicker than I can extract all the text. And you can see at this point it's becoming more and more critical to Google to do so. I don't know if any of you guys had looked previously in the past at something called Sindice, SINDICE.com. And that was a crawler that a friend of mine created a search engine. And what he did, he took the web pages and he literally threw the entire page away. He only kept the markup and built a search engine around that. So it also tells other search engines and other people around the web what is going on. You can think of every little web page, in effect, as a little triple store. And then Google is like referencing all the triple stores on the web page when it uses the knowledge graph. So I'd say at query time, it's probably almost more important to have the machine readable component available and ready than it is the other stuff. In addition, it sends this additional signal to Google. This is what my content's about. You're explicitly telling Google this is what it's about, then you tell it in language, then you try and set it in an API. The more ways and the larger number of ways you can put that content on the web page consistently and sending the same signal to Google. For example, in e-commerce, you want to send it via your product feed, via your structured markup, and via the content on your page. Maybe even via tabled information. You don't want to be repetitive, but you want to be informative and consistent in all of those. And in any verification system, you can see very much so this is the case in the Knowledge Vault. It just notches up the certainty that these facts are the case, or that this page is saying what it's saying. because it's accumulating and aggregating information from multiple sources to ensure that your page is in fact what you're saying. It got trained by having to duck around all these link farms and things I discovered when I started looking into this stuff. And so it just makes the search engine feels safer because it notches up that certainty factor.
I know what you mean, Amon. Though it's for years it's been we should just worry about the content. It's all about the content and not about doing these kind of outside things, or we've had this long-standing not argument but debate on these shows where we've had copywriters on and they don't touch our content. I just want my content to go up on the web, and then search engines will find it, they'll index it, and keep your dirty SEO hands out of my beautiful content. And now it's kind of like we're going back to the realm of, all right, well, we need to facilitate how that content is digested.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of what you're saying, Amon, correct? It's kind of like we're coming full circle back to 2000.
To an extent, yeah. I mean, we know that Google's long-term view is always to make the engine smarter. So, one of the specifics we've addressed about authorship as one form of markup is, this was heavily incentivized. It still was less than 10% of websites that did it, but heavily incentivized. And a couple of years down the line, once Google's learned what it can from our improved data set to teach its own algorithms, they drop it. Isn't the whole point of using schema to give a better set of data for the machine learning, at which point they won't care whether we've got the schema markup or not, everyone will get the benefit?
If you take a look at the actual definition of schema, it's a way of focusing the content you create, the information that you write about, for the field that you're in, for the type of entity, business entity that you are. So if you're a baseball team, you might have a set of sports-related schema that tells you you should include this type of fact and this type of fact and this type of fact. If you're a tire store, you have a completely different set of attributes and facts that you want to include on your pages, that you want to write about. And these are things that people have been either volunteering or spending lots of money or their time or both working on to try to come up with a rich set of facts and attributes that might be termed as schema, that you can use as a site owner to make sure you're putting that kind of information on your web pages. So it's not just about having your content indexed, it's making sure that you have the content that people may want to see and making sure that gets on your pages.
Right. There's a reason that schema.org was created the way it was. It's what search engines are interested in these things because people are. They want to create engaging, interesting and useful and engaging results.
I think Bill just touched on the one thing that I do support schema for. I think it's a great framework for content creators to use to say these are the things you should be talking about in relation to this product. These are the things that should be on your page in relation to this product. So, particularly when we're talking about a physical product, how big is it? How heavy is it? All the things that actually some customer out there is going to be really, this is going to be a critical factor to them. So for that, I do like it, but I just object to adding extra markup that doesn't suit the user, that suits the search engine. On the idea that right now Google is rewarding it, but I honestly believe that Google's whole model, unless they've completely changed, is that over time they are going to start ignoring our schema data once they've taught the knowledge graph to know what kind of thing we're discussing and how to pick it off the page for itself without needing the extra markup.
Well, the other interesting thing is once the whole web's marked up, it kind of makes it open game for competitors to Google as well. Because you can just send something to scrape a web page and create your own knowledge graph once you have the structure of schema.org. And that's what's so powerful about it and why the search engines are working together with it. So the social engines like Facebook has a different vocabulary or ontology, and it's using a slightly different syntax. The syntax, and so the syntax is a little different, the semantics is a little bit different. But in effect, it also opens up the world to other people wanting to create interesting other vertical search engines, creating a niche market, because if Google's just scooped it all up and it's so valuable to them, not that hard for somebody else to come up with an idea and leverage that as well, which is why I never liked that data highlighter. It's like make the markup available just to Google, you know?
Uh-huh. It's clever that it hides the markup from everybody else, but it doesn't work as well as it should, at least my limited experiments with it so far.
Yeah, I've heard it's pretty kludgy, but the mere notion that they came up with it was sort of kind of fun. I mean, astounding in a way. Smart, but I suppose it's the same with disavowed links, right? Only Google can see a link you disavow.
Mm-hmm.
So Google finds interesting information that somehow you can't see it unless you Google, but I don't think they're going pushing that too much at this point.
I'm asking myself, as I tried with the data markup and tagger tool, if I'm having difficulties having Google find the patterns I'm suggesting or the information I wanted to see and tag and mark in a certain way, how much difficulty is Google having with crawling the content of my pages, indexing it, and making it so that it can be found in a search? And should I make some changes to the way I create my pages so that I have more patterns that are easier to find information on?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for rich information about a topic, any topic, it's very, very helpful to sit and think about how you maybe can structure it around schema.org or what the search engines are interested in, and from there go out and expand it. It's be interesting to think about it, well, is this an attribute of a product? Is this something that's not in schema.org that's interesting? Could you find a means of putting it on a web page in the form of structured information, like tables? Wikidata is another huge initiative of Google's. And that's supposed to be ultimately replacing DBpedia. And that's also leveraging made very, very heavy use of tables. So that's another interesting thing to possibly look at or consider. I'm on the Wikidata users group, but I haven't seen any announcements recently on the topic.
So, do you think that schema is more important to the large corporation or to the small business? Because to me it does seem that this is one of those tools right now that a lot of the big companies who put up a lot of information, but it was, you know, they had no idea of optimization, they had too much they were trying to cram into their page. This really helps them, whereas the small businesses that were using their advantage previously in trying to understand what the user was about, specifically page per page, are almost going to be losing that advantage if schema gets much weight.
I don't think so. I think in many ways the semantic web is constructed or designed in the ways to allow original long-tail content to surface. So I think if a small business did mark up their pages with sufficient detail, they could get a very unique result when users are searching for it. It's just like saying to search engine, hey, these are the interesting things I have on my page, and raise the flag. For example, in America, there's a strange concept that you can get peanut butter and jelly in stripes in a jar. So if you mark it up and you tell the search engines, hey, I've got, you know, edible foods that are peanut butter and jelly in stripes, it would surface. Mm-hmm. Those are entities with properties. So it allows unique and original content to surface in many ways, as it's marked up far more than keywords where the noise can sort of get drowned out. You get drowned out in the noise.
And one of the patents from Google, I'm sorry. One of the patents that came out from Google in the last year described how people might do a natural language query like, what is the movie where Robert Duvall says he likes the smell of napalm in the morning? And the patent says, okay, Google might take that and search amongst all the actors in its knowledge base for Robert Duvall. and find all the movies related to them. It might then search those data stores for memorable quotes about things like liking the smell of napalm in the morning. From there, it might identify the entity, the movie, Apocalypse Now. And the exact words used in the query don't matter. As long as you can identify them as facts and that it's about a movie.
Yeah, as long as the concepts are identifiable.
Right. The exact wording doesn't matter. So you're relying less upon keywords and matching keywords exactly on your page.
Yeah, very much so.
So
I think it's an opportunity for small businesses.
Before we get onto the Knowledge Vault and the recent kind of progressions that has been around, so the Knowledge Graph came around 2012, summer of 2012 or thereabouts. But where did that, just for our users that are not too familiar with it, where did that data come from? Was it is it Google's been scraped various data sets? Was it kind of Wikipedia? From my understanding, it was from a number of different sources like CIA World Factbook and Wikipedia and a number of different sources. But is that pretty accurate? Where did it really come? Where did their knowledge graph come from?
Yeah, it's pretty accurate. So I've often said that the linked open data cloud, you can Google linked open data cloud by Richard Cygniak, Cygniak, I believe, is where you can see a diagram or drawing of all the different linked data clouds. Each of those are fairly large triple stores themselves, miniature knowledge graphs. And I've also seen, if you look at that linked open data cloud, Google pulls in more and more of those. So initially they had DBpedia, and then they pulled in IMDb for movies. Then they pulled in Freebase, well, they might be using the Freebase structure around it. Then they pulled in maybe geo names. So if you look, they pulled in all the stuff for medical handouts. All comes out of that linked open data cloud. And a recent addition has been released. And if you have a look in there, you can see an incredible correlation between the different areas Google's adding, other than recipes, I'd say, which they basically created with structured markup. Majority of that initially came from there.
Just a little bit off subject and totally nothing to do with how good these knowledge bases are and what they're doing for us as consumers of the web, if you will. But was there some kind of agreement? Did Google just go out and crawl this data and without any kind of agreement with IMDb or any of that, and just take that data and then that's in the knowledge graph and that's just fine? Because I think if we did that, there'd be a problem.
But no, if you have a look, there's the linked open data clouds. Then they have a version that's also done by license. So each cloud is tagged with the license type associated with it. And I could probably dig up a link if somebody was interested to see what it looked like. So a lot of these are licensed that's Creative Commons or whatever it is. And a lot of that information in the linked open data cloud is actually open. A lot isn't, but a lot of it is.
Right. So so then we've got Freebase. Where does Freebase? Do you want to just quickly talk about that, and where does that fit into this kind of jigsaw puzzle?
So Freebase is one of the bubbles in the linked open data cloud, and it was owned by MetaWeb. And of course, that was one of the biggest and most critical moves that Google made in acquiring it, because this was initially indicative, or the initial test of whether or not they were going to use this technology. And my understanding is that the knowledge graph and the ability to resolve every entity at the end of the day, everything in the world, to one unique identity and store it in such a manner, instead of clustering them all over the place and not having a single location to refer to, basically succeeded at some point beyond what they even imagined. And once they started seeing how well it worked, and also once we have Moore's Law coming into effect, with the fact that this is technology that 10 years ago existed, but it just couldn't scale. Now it can scale. So I've also, many times I've heard this technology referred to as practical semantics at scale. It didn't used to be realistic. I used to work on this high-performance knowledge-based problem, and we had questions we had to answer, and I basically have to write them as little sparkle-like queries, queries for triple stores. And I'd run a reasoner over them. The thing would time out after an hour. Complex queries that, certainly Google now is doing whatever they can to optimize answer time, load time. That's why these search engines also now becoming more predictive in nature. Part of that is they try and second guess what's going on, and it helps them enormously in terms of response time, instead of dealing with these massive possible answer spaces when a query is asked.
So again, just to clarify, Freebase is kind of a knowledge base in itself of facts, figures, data, information about places, people, things like that. But it is curated, so it's based on user input. Correct?
Yeah, it's like a crowdsourced version of Wikipedia, but it's data. It's a semantic database behind it.
Mm-hmm. So unlike Wikipedia, which is mostly text, unstructured text, people write prose. There's some templates in it, but Freebase, everything's labeled, and you fill in lots of forms.
So it starts with the structured data instead of starting with it. And then you populate it accordingly.
Got something wrong with the audio. I don't know if you can hear that. So, in terms of, again, before we get into the knowledge vault, harnessing the power of some of the stuff that we've talked about, if you're a company and you don't have, similar to Wikipedia, if you don't have an entry within Freebase, whether you're a speaker, an author, or a company, is that going to help you having an entry within Freebase? Is that going to help you try to, get some leverage? And I've seen some articles from you in the past where, for example, if you're writing an article about a particular person, to try to help, the search engines, you could actually kind of dictate like the Freebase machine ID. So if you're talking about, doing an article or an interview with Danny Sullivan, you could include that Freebase machine ID on there so that it knows, for example, which Danny Sullivan you're talking about, or if there's a blog post of you, so that it doesn't get confused between the Barbara Starr of CNN. I think there's another Barbara Starr who works at CNN or something like that. But yeah, you could code the page with your Freebase MID tag, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I would recommend it strongly. Any way and anything you can do, tell the search engine more specifically what's on the page and send that same consistent message 16 ways if you can. It just ultimately helps you become more trusted and more authoritative. And why not tell them specifically what it is? You don't want to be confused for the wrong one, because then if people find your page, it'll just bounce.
Right. So again, nothing's changing with the content here. We're talking about making that page speak in unison, if you will, implicitly and explicitly. So your content has got strong signals about what you want to get it, what you want to get across, and the implicit side, the machine, kind of focused side, are both singing the same, singing from the same hymn book, if you will. So, going on to the knowledge the knowledge vault, then, do you want to quickly kind of discuss that in terms of how the knowledge graph fits into it? Is it just a scaled up version of it? Is it like several knowledge graphs all together, kind of like a cluster of them?
I think in essence, so the knowledge vault is really just a research paper that Google published, and they have several along those lines. Because this has succeeded so well, they want to grow the knowledge graph. They want to, it's their baby, right? They always say it's in its infancy. So if you treat it like an infant and you don't want to teach it incorrect facts, which would be a mean thing to do to a person, and hopefully we don't want to do that to a machine, or whatever, I mean, you might want to, you see why they'd get upset. And Google then takes this concept and says, how can we extend it? They want more information, they want more facts. Now, in the olden days, we had something called the knowledge acquisition bottleneck. And that bottleneck and that could slow down all the big projects we were on Acquaint, on everything, is that humans had to define these ontologies, vocabularies, and then they had to hand populate all that information. And there was no ways around it. We had to deal with subject matter experts, etc., to do it. So what happens now on the web is that Google is now trying to figure out, are there other ways they can grow this faster? So that's where the stochastic processes come in, and where it's possible that you have enough volume of data, you can actually derive information with reasonable certainty. So what the Knowledge Vault is really doing, at least in the paper that I read, is it's using several different techniques of extracting information around the web, ranging from tables to different signals sent out, anything they can find, to notch up the certainty until they believe a fact might be, say, known with above 0.9%, 90%, at what point it might go into their giant fact repository or knowledge vault or knowledge graph or whatever you would like to call it. But it's other means of acquiring that information, acquiring more attributes of a specific object or schema, and then validating and verifying it from multiple sources. And once again, this is where the certainty comes in. You notch it up. Just keep thinking of notching up a process in order to know that something's true. And that applies in many ways, both in how they may crawl the web to aggregate enormous amounts of data, to how you are going to tell a search engine something in a consistent manner.
So, like, if you've got, 7 sources all stating that the average, I don't know, I'm just crazy example, but the average height of a particular animal is this, and that you've got 700 kind of all at a different level, it's going to start to distrust almost the ones that are outside 2 or 3 standard deviations, or whatever you call it, but outside the realms of where those facts should be, and they become less trusted sources, and so then it learns from that. Is that kind of what you're saying? Kind
of. So, of course, the source of the information has got a credibility factor.
Yeah.
So it was notable, its interest, but it's also got a credibility factor, which is sort of like authority. So it's a very authoritative source. Hundreds of other people could get it wrong. And this information has a tendency to propagate. For example, I once built a semantic search engine for UPC codes, barcodes, and I'd try and verify the fact that I was getting the correct information from 3 or 4 different sources. What happens is that one source would pick up the piece of bad information, and then it would get propagated to all the other bad sources. So those are patterns that search engines can look for and also pick up. How this misinformation is propagated. And these are other intrinsic inherent patterns that they can look for in making those judgments.
There are guidelines that different knowledge bases follow to determine whether or not they should include certain types of facts. They have things like notability standards, and they try to with the Knowledge Vault, they're trying to increase the amount of information that was included about different types of things and how correct it was. But the interesting thing is the notability standards that might be followed, so that certain types of information gets included. If you've ever tried to make a Wikipedia entry about a person, they have a couple of long pages that tell you that ask you if the person is notable, and provide a number of examples of how they might be determined to be notable. And I think the other knowledge bases have their own standards, their own methods for making those types of determinations.
Yeah, so Freebase has a predicate called notable for, which you can see in many things, and you can see that Google obviously leverages that very heavily. What is this person notable for? What's the place notable for? And in fact, when I've gone in and looked at some of the Freebase dumps using Sparkle, I've seen as many as almost, I think, 25 different notability types of predicates that they leverage. The other interesting thing to do is have a look at some of the results turned from the Freebase Developer API. So there's a hit counter with every single entity. It'll tell you how many numbers, what number of times that entity was called in total. So that'll tell you how popular an entity is, and I'm pretty sure they'd be using that. So when you're looking at trending entities, you can see how many times this is called. It returns a factor telling you one of the results they return in your specific API is that it'll return notability information and other things like that.
So would something like that be used by Google, say, if somebody performs a search for a person's name and there are a couple of entities that go by that name?
So in that case, they may start looking at other things, like who this person knows, what was the intent of their query. It's more, can they use context to disambiguate the query sufficiently that they can correctly answer the question? And that's where they just keep using context. The more context they get, if you think of an entire search space, right, an answer space of possible answers, every time you add context, you're like notching down that giant decision tree, making it smaller and smaller and smaller and easier to answer that question. And it's faster to answer the question as well. So context is helpful in so many ways. So providing as much context as possible is probably a good idea, even in writing for humans.
True.
Yeah, I was just going to add that in. You know, we talked about the triples before, the subject, predicate, object. I mean, does that, again, I'm not meaning to upset the copywriters. I know Michelle added in before, not all copywriters. I'm sorry about that, Michelle. I wasn't talking about you. But, you know, we talk about the way that the RDF, you know, resource description framework kind of, and how semantics is working. Knowing that, you know, is there a way to kind of structure content in that way so that, you know, the actual written content is kind of digested in a better way?
I think you probably just want to stick to best practices, right? So I think Guha in one of his talks was saying the web was made up of, what's it? Copy, paste, and edit. And there was a time where that was the case, right? So think about the fact that search engines aren't that interested in pages that are copy, paste, and edit, and if they can detect it,
yeah,
you want to try and create your own unique perspective on it, your own take on the matter, something that makes that content interesting, unique, and engaging. And of course, it will add context as well. So,
and there are a lot of signals that a search engine is looking at and looking for when it tries to index a page now. And things like authenticity, expertise, and so on are areas where we don't have clearly defined messages from the search engines about what exactly it is that they want to see. But that's probably going to fall into some of this knowledge web type stuff, where we have different confidence levels, different ways to tell how much somebody might be a certain entity type expert in something.
So I think that comes into topic-based search, which is sometimes what, you know, so the search engines, I'm sure, I mean, Freebase is all made up of topics. And I'm pretty sure they must keep a record of topics or concepts and store somehow who's an authoritative expert on it, ranging from a source of information to possibly even an individual writing about it.
How much is it open to abuse? I mean, how much are they opening up a whole new form of Google bombing, where you can go into various databases because they're able to be edited, and, you know, input that President Obama's IQ is 60. And once it's in 3 or 4 of them, is Google now going to start reporting that President Obama's IQ is 60? How open is this to abuse at the moment?
It's fairly open to abuse, but I mean, you know, we saw rich snippets get spammed. Remember, people would put, they had so many reviews and whatever, and they didn't. So, you know, Google clearly has a team who's up there to detect it. I know that events and reviews are the most spammed of all sources, and I'm sure things will happen. People will come up with creative ways of spamming it.
Mm-hmm.
But just as they do, Google will ultimately come down on you. And more than ever now, if you do eventually want to get a rich snippet, you want your website to have, you know, be considered as having a good site quality. So you're running a risk by doing that, because maybe you won't get these enhanced displays or into the knowledge graph after that.
And think about local search and how people were trying to spam local search, where they were doing things like including the names of their cities in the title of their business or in their address. They
and
would
URL.
#1 plumber, things like that, and you know.
Well, that's kind of what made me bring that up, because of course Google Maps, the more they've tried to make it clever, the more abuse we're seeing of it, to the point where people are now able to intercept calls by setting themselves up as this entity and putting their number instead of the real person's number. So when somebody searches for it, up comes the number, and it's not that entity at all. The classic example, of course, was the FBI office, the CIA office. But it does strike me that sometimes Google is kind of overreaching and not realizing just how mischievous some people can be.
I think they have a fairly good idea. I mean, yeah, people can be really mischievous, but that's also security. I mean, once you're starting to use structured data, leveraging everything via an API and via data sources. So that means it does become fair game for hackers to span if they can find a way of accessing or intercepting information. But I think that goes back more and more to the old security questions. How secure is the data? How secure is the information served up by Google?
Mm-hmm.
How much bots?
There was something that the Freebase team posted in Google Plus a couple months ago, a white paper where they talked about some of the algorithms they use to trust people who volunteer and add information in knowledge base, and they included things like how long the information's been live on Freebase. If it's been live more than 4 weeks, they're more likely to trust it. Nobody's updated it and changed it, for instance. Wikipedia tends to get updated a lot more frequently than that, and there are also automated bots that try to do some type of correction. But you know, with any ranking algorithm, with any algorithm that determines what's going to be displayed on the page, there's a cost of attack. There's a cost for using that information that, when you're working on a search engine, you have to plan for and attempt to anticipate. And it's, you know, true with PageRank and abuse of link systems and so on. It's not just the knowledge base; it's everything. So there's a certain level of, as Barbara was saying, security that needs to go into that.
It's less spammable than the old straight PageRank algorithm, and I think things will get better and better. Maybe more.
Yeah, I kind of look at Wikipedia, and you know, it's almost become synonymous with internet facts, i.e. somebody's made it up and it's sat there for a long time and they're jealously guarding their little category, and every time somebody corrects it, it'll be put back to what they want to say. And it can take years to sort out one of those abusive editors sometimes. So I do think, well, Google's actually been using Wikipedia for a long time. It's been promoting Wikipedia for a long time. But I mean, marketing is a classic example. Wikipedia's page that defines what marketing is probably the worst definition of marketing I've ever read anywhere, and yet it stays. And it really is. But if you haven't looked at that page, anybody go and look at that page. It's terrible. It really is.
Well,
it's all about promotion.
And he was told by his teachers not to trust Wikipedia data. He was horrified. I like Wikipedia. Why shouldn't I believe their data?
But you know, for some, you know, we have some clients. I mean, I get asked this question a lot. You know, if you Google any big company, and you know the box comes up on the right hand side, displaying the knowledge graph data, and kind of coming back to what you're all saying about how up to date that data is. You know, the CEO of one particular client, the CEO is wrong. Everything's wrong except the stock price. Stock price is being brought in through Google Finance, and that's up to date. But the CEO is the CEO who was there 3 years ago, and no matter how much feedback, you can hit the feedback button until you're blue in the face, and you can try to correct it in other sources. But have they created an animal almost that is so difficult to manage? You know what? There's so many instances of wrong data in it. I don't know, where we go from here in terms of it's the system's only as good as how many times it's going to get the information correct, and you've got so many businesses I hear complaining about that data. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but in terms of their ability to get the feedback and then correct that data, there doesn't seem to be anything in place to actually make it happen quickly.
No, and I mean, I don't think that's not automated either. So it's just like when you have a corporation and has inheriting legacy databases.
Yeah.
Legacy data that basically Google's inheriting. And I think with other projects and other large knowledge base or massive knowledge base projects they're looking at, they might find more interesting ways of dealing with something like that. I mean, there's many, many projects, not just the Knowledge Vault, that are all focused on basically trying to grow and create a larger, more accurate knowledge base, knowledge graph in Google's. There's the Biopedia, there's many.
I think a lot of us would say we're on one now, that Google Plus is, one heck of a knowledge graph that it's been building to kind of bring things right up to date.
I think it's getting better. I mean, I think they've made some pretty impressive strides. And yes, I mean, structured markup is ripe for spam. I mean, one of the classic examples I saw was a recipe marked up as a product. So somebody could get their image to show with reviews and a price. So, showing up, I think, right on my front page for something. I was like, that's it.
No.
Well, we're gonna coming up to the hour, so I'm gonna wrap it up, and I obviously want to say thanks to Barbara for popping on today. Do you want to add any last thoughts, Amon, Bill, before we sign off?
Yeah, I'll get mine out of the way, since I'm the kind of schema skeptic, if you will.
That's a great username.
For me, it's still a case where for each client I have to weigh up the extra code I'm adding against the benefit I expect to see. And for some clients, absolutely, I would recommend schema all of the way, especially if you've got a complex product that is related to other things, but that people may not know is out there. I think having schema can help discoverability by relating it to things it's very, very similar to. But for a lot of small businesses, I'm not seeing the advantage in the short term. In the medium term, I think it'll be there, and then it'll be gone again quite quickly afterwards, much like authorship. I really do believe that Google's end goal is to make the engine smarter at converting text, because even with authorship, with all of the promotion, with all of us experts telling people to use it, with all of the ability to see your face in search, which is about as a bigger carrot on a stick as there could possibly be, it was less than 10% of websites actually did it. So Google's still got to deal with the other 90%, and for that reason, they're always going to have to make the engine able to work without the markup. So that's my end position on it.
But Barbara, just on that point, what kind of percentage are we talking about in terms of websites? I don't know if there's any statistics on this, but in terms of websites that have adopted markup.
I've seen ranging definitions from 1% to 15%, depending on where you get your results. You've probably seen that too, though.
Under 3% seems to be the one that I hear the most often.
Well, Yahoo gave a metric according to the analysis of the last year's Bing crawl, the common crawl. They said 15%. Mika said that at.
But that was any level of markup, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And authorship, I think, did get into the higher percentages in certain sections.
Yeah, I think there's a breakdown you could probably pull out. If you look at Peter Mika on Yahoo, you pull up his slides, he's got a lot of that broken down and marked up.
Bill, do you want to add some last words before I ask Barbara too?
Sure. I think it really pays off for people to start paying attention to schema, to learning more about semantic markup. Google seems like they're pretty serious about showing more knowledge web information in search results. Yahoo started up a knowledge base in the last year. They actually didn't have a knowledge graph like Google did until within this year. Microsoft's Satori and other programs are bringing semantic results, knowledge panel type sidebars, and so on into search in ways that we hadn't anticipated. And I think as it starts growing, as we get more of it, it's going to build upon itself. You know, the structured snippets that we just started seeing that Google announced this week. If you notice other snippets, there are links within some snippets that look like the old quick links that Google used to show that don't look like they're based as much on user behavior, user traffic as they may have been in the past, but instead how the things may be related to the thing you searched for originally. I did a search for oil spills Alaska, and one of the quick links was to the captain of the Exxon Valdez. Another of the links was where the oil spill happened. All the quick links were related, but they weren't related in ways that made it look like they were based on user traffic. They were related in ways that said this is an important attribute of this entity. So, you know, we're seeing that type of movement towards semantics in the knowledge web playing a bigger role in search results. It's worth our while to pay attention and to investigate.
The other thing we have to also consider is now, you know, we're moving towards a system where we have a proliferation of all kinds of device types. And the semantic web really prepositions the entire concept of the web to be extended even to the Internet of Things. And so these little search are going to end up being objects, and they can size themselves and display themselves according to the device type. So in many ways, you're prepositioning yourself for where technology is going, or the fact that we're migrating to the Internet of Things. It can help with responsive design from a search engine perspective. They have to resize all of this. And how do you navigate information? Typically drill down. That's why they used to call it explorers. And when you drill down on information, you drill down through entities, attributes, and facts. It's just how information is navigated naturally. It's a form of faceted search, faceted browsing. So if you think that it's sort of inevitable that that's the way users are going to look to find data, your data needs to be made findable in a similar fashion.
Fantastic. So I think on that note, we're going to wrap up. I'm going to say thank you so much to Barbara for spending the time with us today and letting us all learn more about knowledge bases and the knowledge graph. Thanks, as always, to our good friends Amon Johns and Bill Slawski. And just a few words from me. If you are a small business and you're kind of looking at, you know, obviously we've talked about the importance of markup and trying to let the search engines, you know, dissect your information and read it, you know, doing anything you can to help them along the way. You know, if you're coming out with an e-commerce website, look at, you know, does that e-commerce platform, for example, you know, support things like Schema, like, you know, Magento. There's a very good plugin for Magento, for example, and things like that. So you need to be thinking about these things at all times. Thanks very much again for tuning in, and tune in next week at 3 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be doing another, not autopsy. What are we doing next week, Bill? A website clinic where we have another website on the operating table, not an autopsy.
Right, we're not going to do an autopsy. No postmortems.
Forensic analysis.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Yes,
thanks, Emma. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.